people, and I've worked with a lot of people that think they're microchipped. To be honest with you, we're just not finding it. It does exist, and it is happening. I've worked with James Wahlberg, who has made the news. He does have something in him that looks like it's probably a chip. Jesse Beltran, I'll let him introduce himself professionally, but I have frequency scanned him. He is lighting up in some certain spots. He's got some radiologic evidence of being chipped and has a little bit different take on things, and actually has some good support.
Well, thank Dr. Holmes for inviting me over to speak with you all and to see and hear all your experiences. All I can say is wow. I never fathomed hearing the experiences that each and every one of you are going through. A little bit about my background. I'm a retired Sacramento City firefighter paramedic. I've been in emergency medical services quite some time, for over a decade. I was responsible for starting the emergency paramedic transportation services for the city of Elk Grove and for the city of Sacramento. I was also one of the key players in that gave the fire departments a landmark decision in the courts that gave them jurisdiction over who should provide emergency medical services to their constituents or the people that they serve. I have been an expert witness for the city of Sacramento in their lawsuits. I've also been an expert witness and credible witnesses in murder cases and so forth. I retired in 2000 from the city of Sacramento due to a back injury. I was involved in an ambulance accident while I was treating a patient and suffered some back injury. After that, I became the chief of operations for a company called Nextrack Communications, which was one of the leading Nextel dealerships in Sacramento back in the late 90s, early 2000s. My plight is this: while I was the operations manager for the private ambulance companies in Sacramento County, I was witness to a murder that was done by law enforcement. I came across as a kidnapping of a 4 or 5 year old girl, and I was training another supervisor who was recently promoted, and he's now currently a Sacramento fire captain in Sacramento County. We watched them apprehend the suspect. They pulled him out of the driver's side of his vehicle, and they proceeded to beat him to death. We watched it before our very eyes, and then law enforcement comes by and say, "Oh, by the way, we need you to come save this guy." So we carried our paramedic bag. Long story short, tried to resuscitate him, and to no avail, the gentleman passed away. As a young man, I tried to report it, but not being very experienced, and the culture back then was you had to be afraid of law enforcement, repercussions of anything of any kind. The culture was don't say anything, we would be blacklisted, and other things would happen. So about 2 years ago, I was in a round robin discussion in a social gathering, and we were talking about human rights violations. And the subject of abuses by law enforcement came up. And unbeknownst to me, someone in that gathering had affiliations with law enforcement. Hence my saga. Shortly after that, I cracked my tooth on a pink cherry. It's kind of funny. I ended up going to a dentist's office, and I was going in for just 2 root canals. I cracked a tooth, and they said I needed 2 root canals, and they scheduled a few days later. And I was rendered unconscious for about 4 to 6 hours against my consent. I never signed anything to say that I could be knocked out, but when I woke, I realized that the front of my shirt was completely drenched, which means that I had no protected airway. But prior to that, a very young dentist had this syringe. It was a very, very distinctive syringe. It reminded me of a military syringe, and being in medicine for basically since I was 16 years old, worked in the hospital before I became a paramedic. I knew it was unusual, just to numb you up with the type of syringe he used. And I asked him, I go, "What is that for?" And he goes, "Oh, it's to get into very, very difficult places." And I realized that he exerted, I could see him just shaking when he stuck it in, right in this area here. Well, after that experience, I began to hear what is called a 60-cycle whine. My background is also in IT. I did proprietary programming, and I built networks, and I'm very familiar with electronics. I soon realized that something was not normal. I knew that there was a foreign body, but I also knew if I were to go and express this to anyone that I would probably be labeled a 5150. So I was very tactical and very methodical about how I was going to proceed and getting the evidence to get to where I am today. Now, my plight has sort of been accelerated in hearing most of you. I hear that you've been dealing with this issue for a long time. If I'm not correct, most of you have been doing this for some time. My plight began about a year and a half ago, a little over a year and a half ago. Where I currently am now is I mimicked having signs of a TIA, which is a transient ischemic attack, or signs of a mini stroke. I was fortunate enough that I was retired. I had health insurance, and I was able to get these studies done. So after getting the mini stroke scans done, we realized that there was something that very cylinder in shape on my right mandible side, and under 400 times magnification, you can actually identify it, and it had 3 different segmentations. I was on a campaign. I was the communications director for a gentleman by the name of Rick Redding out of Sacramento County, running for California Assembly District 9. Colleen was the assistant to the communications department there. He successfully won that campaign, and when we brought this to his attention, his immediate response is, "Jesse, this is what we used on prisoners in Afghanistan. This is S4, S5 intelligence." Upon that, he, through a colleague of his who was a radio talk show host, obtained an attorney for me. That attorney immediately sent us to a periodontist who had this new type of machinery, which is a high digital panoramic X-ray. And when we got that back, and an unexpected result is that we could see an obvious foreign body in this area. It's in the TMJ joint, which is a very, very ingenious way of hiding a chip if you're going to implant a chip on someone, because there's a void there, and under typical X-rays or exams, you're not going to see it. What that does is that we hear in 2 ways. We hear via neural pathways, nerve endings, and then we hear via bone conduction. What these chips do is they transmit sound via bone conduction when they're in this area, which can sound like it's coming from your ear. It could sound like tinnitus. We hear that theme a lot. So once we had that, I think someone didn't do their homework when they did this to me. My background, along with being a firefighter and being in the high-tech industry, I had a business partner, a silent business partner, who was a very powerful state lobbyist in the state of California. His name is Brian Hatch. He's also the president of the California Professional Firefighters Association, and is responsible for having our memorial that we have at the state capitol. He has enough influence in which he allowed us to do, I have a third-party film company who's doing the documentary, who's been following my flight, allowed us to do filming at the state capitol in certain areas. And the introduction to that is almost complete. So they are following this along the way. So once I had enough support, I met with we have a colleague from school who's the district attorney out of Santa Clara County, who Colleen and I met with, showed him the radiographic evidence. He immediately was familiar with it. In fact, he referred us to the director of the ACLU, whose name is Sanjay Berry, Senator Joe Simidian's office, who I mentioned earlier. And he recommended that we go to the local district attorney's office. So we proceeded to head in those venues. In my days with the fire service, when we were on this fight to allow the fire departments to take over ambulance services, a gentleman by the name of Chief Rick Martinez out of Sacramento County was heading that fight. I happened to work with him concurrently. He recruited me out of the Elk Grove Fire Department to come to work to the city of Sacramento. Currently, Chief Martinez is the Director of Homeland Security in Sacramento County and works directly under Governor Schwarzenegger. Colleen and I had a meeting with Chief Martinez, showed him the radiographic evidence. He immediately knew what it was, and his immediate response was, "You need to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office." So immediately after that meeting, we headed to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Sacramento County. Upon hearing from the U.S. Attorney, I was a little disheartened because I didn't feel comfortable with his recommendations. Can anyone guess what he recommended I do?
I'm sure go to the psych ward.
The site.
No?
F.B.I.
You remember, I've got the Director of Homeland Security telling me to go to the U.S. Attorney.
Right.
That speaks volumes.
He told you to go to the police department.
He told me to go to the F.B.I.
Right.
Okay?
We know how that goes.
So, lo and behold, there's an election for sheriffs in Sacramento County. And all of a sudden, I'm getting phone calls that want to sit down and they want to talk to me. And they want to hear what I know. Okay?
This is the FBI.
No, local sheriff's department. 3 candidates, and two of the 3 contacted me. On the day of the pre-primary elections, I got a phone call from a detective from the homicide division that said, on behalf of Scott Jones, who is he is in charge of the homicide division in Sac County, we're calling you because we'd like to hear about a murder that you witnessed over 17.5 years ago. And I'm going to stop that one at there. I'm going to stop the story at there because I don't want to get into any legal repercussions as this story goes forth and the filming continues, and we're quickly approaching, hopefully, an ending and a new beginning for everyone, both as victims and what this country is about. We have met with Senator Joe Simonian's office. We've met with Dan Lundgren's office, who's a congressman in our district, a U.S. congressman. And what we were told by his people was, is this a minority issue? I looked in complete disbelief, and I looked in their eyes, and I took a deep breath, and I said, no, absolutely not. This is an American issue. This undermines everything that this country is about. Everything. I liken this to worse than any nuclear bomb that we could have, not in the respects to loss of life, but in this perspective. This completely destroys everything that this country is about overnight when it comes to rights of privacy.